So today we are going to talk about The Gift of Failure, one of my favorite education and slash parenting books of all time. First published in 2015, this kind of put Jessica Lahey on the map. Um, Her recent book, this one we will talk about in another video, but just a little bit about the author. Jessica Lahey is an educator, speaker, and writer. She has been English Latin writing teacher in middle school for more than a decade. She writes a bi-weekly parent-teacher conference advice column for the New York Times. She's a contributing writer for The Atlantic. She appears on multiple podcasts. You can follow her on social media. Hopefully I can link all those below and tag her and stuff like that. She has a JD from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, with a concentration in juvenile and education law. So I've read this book probably 6 or 7 times now. Originally, I got it as a parent because I have 7 children and how to raise my kids. But it translated super quickly to the classroom and what this looks like for students in the classroom. And one of the things I think now as an administrator, when I work with parents and kids, and a lot of times we get asked as administrators, well, what should I do? And it's interesting because I am not a expert, right? I'm not a parenting expert. I do have 7 kids, and I've worked with thousands of kids at this point in time in my educational career, but I would not consider myself an expert. But a lot of times, parents are in a situation with kids, whether it's their first time having kids in middle school, the first time going through problems with their children. They generally ask administrators or teachers, "I don't know what to do. What should I do?" Anyway, so it's interesting too to look at this book now, 8 years, almost 9 years after it's been published, and seeing that generation of kids come through. Whether it was the lawnmower parent or the Unabomber or the stealth bomber parent, I'll explain those in a few minutes. But what that's done to our kids and different things like that. Anyway, so the setup is pretty simple. It talks about the crucial role of failure in kids' lives and how that can actually become a success instead of, kind of a hindering point. It also really argues about modern parenting styles, which often revolve around shielding or clearing the way or solving problems for kids. And we've talked about, helicopter parents, stealth bomber parents. Now we've got snowplow or lawnmower parents is what we call them. Essentially, the idea is this kind of evolved, right? The helicopter parent was parents that were kind of just always hovering there and just always watching what was going on and kind of being there. And this is nothing against those parenting styles, but we're seeing now the effects of those. And so then there was what we call the stealth bomber parent. Stealth bomber parent is just kind of watching from way up high. And then if there was a problem, they would just zoom in and just kind of like drop a bomb on the situation and try and solve that situation. And now kind of the coin term, right, is snowplow or lawnmower. And that's basically where the parents clear every single obstacle out of the way for their children. And anyway, so she argues, right, in this book, if you've read it, if you haven't read it, that this will lead to shielding. I'm quoting here. So, shielding from failure and disappointment actually will impede their ability to learn essential life skills. So, I'm going to do this a little bit longer than normal. I'm going to go chapter by chapter, and then we'll do a 5-3-1, where we have 5 takeaways, 3 quotes, and 1 kind of overarching theme. So, and I have my notes here, so I'm trying to make sure that I have all this. And again, this is my copy, my personal copy. You can see it's kind of marked up in different spots where I have things underlined and quotes and different things that I really liked. And I want to just start off with this one. So this is what I have. So this is from page 15. It says, the self-esteem movement promised that we could feel good about ourselves and everything that we do, that kids would always like their parents, and that they would feel great about our parenting all the time. But this is not how life, let alone effective parenting, works. Children who like their parents all the time are not apt to be children who are corrected when they misbehave, called out for their mistakes, and are asked to consider the needs of other people. It does not feel good to punish or correct our children. No one wants to be the cause of tears or hurt feelings. It feels great to hand out cookies just before dinner with a conspiratorial finger over their lips, bonding us to our kids in a shared secret treat. It feels wonderful to swoop in and rescue when we take the forgotten homework to school, saving our kids from the disappointment of recessed attention and then the stern glare of a teacher. The catch is, though, what feels good to us isn't always what is good for our children. We are not used to putting off what feels right and good for us in the short term in order to do what is right and good for our children in the long term. That's super important because that's really what she's talking about, right? She's talking about helping our kids create how they feel about, create a better future for themselves and how they feel about themselves through failure. Now, she talks about the stakes, right? You don't want to let them fail at everything. But anyway, so that was one that I want to start off. So chapter 1 kind of talks about this intrinsic extrinsic dichotomy. It talks about how intrinsic motivation diminishes when children are overly rewarded or praised from their achievements. And we talk about the trophy generation or the participation generation, where everybody gets a trophy and everybody gets a prize for participating, and some of the long-term damaging effects of that, right? And the value is that learning from mistakes is emphasized, but also there are losers. People lose. That's why we keep score. There are certain things that she talks about that, I think about. The big thing right now is that reflections, right? So reflections is done every year at the elementary schools, and kids are expected to participate. And I do not push it on my kids at all. I'm like, if you want to do it, you can do it. We get a letter sometimes, depending on the grade and the teacher, oh, this is required for class. I'm like, it's not required. I'm not making my kid do a project to enter the reflections fair. And again, that's me personally. And I love to help them, if they want to be creative, if they want to do something. But I've learned at this point that it's just like, if you want to do it, right? We're not going to make you do it. So she talks about number 2, chapter 2, right, is the overparenting trap, where overparenting is defined as its negative impacts on children's autonomy and competence explored. For example, parents doing their children's homework, parents doing, chores for the kids. And what's funny is that, like, I've learned this in my own experience, is that my kids and my wife and I fall into this trap too. So I'm not perfect. Again, this is the book review. Our kids learn that if they don't do something quite right, that my wife will step in and finish it for them. And so eventually she just does it for them. And one of the things that I think about is like cleaning, right? So there's a certain level of cleanliness that she wants. And if the kids don't reach that, they've learned over time now that if they just do a crappy job, whether intentional or unintentional, is that somebody will come in after and get it to the high level. And that's partly me and my wife's fault for not letting them just have a dirty bathroom or a dirty toilet or whatever. And eventually they have started to catch on as they've gotten older. It's like, no, there's a certain level of cleanliness that you need to keep within our house of 9 people to keep everybody sane, right? And once it hits that threshold where it's super dirty, then it just kind of breaks down. And that goes for like laundry, clothes, different things like that. Anyway, so there's this part of this whole thing which I love that she talks about, and this is in chapter 3, is the learning process. Is it talks about how children learn and develop problem-solving skills, and how if we take that away as parents or teachers or adults or grandparents, if we take that away, it robs them of that lesson that they can learn from failure. It robs them of the ability to try again. It robs them of the ability to, ask for help. It robs them of a lot of abilities, but it also allows us to frame and teach them how failure is, how we cope with failure, both as adults and as kids. And so if there's an opportunity to teach your kids how to work through failure, and we say through it, right? There's the way through failure is not around it or skip it or to have somebody else do it. It's just kind of like, oh, I'm going to fail, I'm going to do it again, right? And we know this, but it's so much easier sometimes to do it with people that are our own kids. As an educator, it can help, solve those problems. But when it comes back to my own kids, it's not there. So one of the quotes that I wanted to read from chapter 3. Let's see if I have it. Sorry to do this while you guys are here. This is actually in chapter 4. I apologize. So we'll jump to chapter 4. Chapter 4 is encouragement from the sidelines, the real connection between praise and self-esteem. Talks about the ability to allow kids and students natural consequences, and this idea that there are natural consequences, and there's moments as an adult where you want to step in when those natural consequences those natural consequences have long-term effects, right? If your child is going to be dabbling in alcohol or drugs, or if they're going to do something illegal, there are times as a parent where you have to step in. But those of you that are listening that have adult children, you know that when they get to a certain point, they are going to have to suffer their own consequences. And sometimes an adult, those consequences are pretty severe. I work with people, I've seen it in my own family, where the natural consequences are much more severe than what I could give them as a parent. Let me see. Here's what we got. When a teacher, and this is the part that I highlighted, when a teacher moves around the room praising each child, saying, "Great job, you're so smart," the students figure out pretty quickly that someone is being lied to. They know they can't all be geniuses, and they begin to doubt our honesty, or at the very best, our judgment. And so when that happens, then we as the adults get viewed by the students as untrustworthy, not telling the truth, or having poor judgment. And then that creates a trust cycle. And she goes in and talk about that. And the whole change in culture where, everybody wins a prize. Well, we're the last team in the league. How did we get a trophy? Right. So one of the things that she says, that you can go through that is, and this jumps into chapter 5, is fostering autonomy, which are ways to encourage independence in our children. And the way that I like to describe it, and it's funny because I feel like today my kids are safer than kids have ever been on the history of Earth. But I call it the circle, right? So when I was younger, my circle was about 2.5, 3 miles. I could go about 3 miles away and my mom was fine with it, right? Whether it was to go to 7-Eleven, whether it was to go to the dirt hills to ride our bikes or go to the football field, and all of this was in a circle. And as I got older, my circle got bigger. And what's been interesting as kids have gotten older now, and me as a parent too, is that circle has actually gotten really, really small because of cell phones and digital access and where kids are and pinging and all that stuff. Is the parents want to know exactly where their kids are at. And it's funny because I've fallen into it too, where my kid is supposed to be in school. And, I get this feeling like, oh, they have lunch today. They've missed a couple classes this week. I can pull up my phone and look and see where my kid is at, if he's at school or not. And if he's not, I'll send him a text and say, "Hey, where are you?" Which never would have happened when I was younger. But the part of that too, right, is the safety thing, where, yeah, maybe the world was more dangerous 20, 30 years ago, but parents just let us roam free, right? I'm a Gen Xer, right? So there's this weird stage where they just let us do whatever we wanted, and unless something was broken, we did get hurt. But the idea of needing to know where our kids are at all times, what they're doing, who they're with, that takes away their autonomy. And so one of the ways that you can kind of teach your kids autonomy is to gradually increase responsibilities and choices for children. And so as we allow them, this is the other side of the circle, where we allow them to make bigger choices and have more freedom, and that circle gets bigger, is we give them more responsibility in those circles, whether it's a job, whether it's, taking care of things or babysitting or different things like that. So again, this is from, chapter 5. I love this quote. This is one of my favorites. If your child has failed at something because she did not work hard enough, then you need to say so. Teach your children to see the realities of her shortcomings and failures and react accordingly. And I like this because sometimes I think that we try and blame everything else for failure, when in reality, it's an opportunity to teach our kids time management, responsibility, work ethic, other things like that. Like, yeah, you're not going to be able to do this thing because you didn't do the thing that got you the thing, whatever that is, right? Whether it's, on a roll or a trip or different things like that. I love that quote. Again, I'm going to read it again. If your child has failed at something because she did not work hard enough, say so. Teach your child to see the realities of her shortcomings and failures and react accordingly. And I know you might have a he or she, and she actually uses those intertwined throughout the book, he or she, whether it's a son or daughter. Anyway, so jumping into chapter 6, right, which is the big one, the role of schools in chapter 6. So let me just get there. This is all marked up because this is the part. So talking about schools and what that looks like and how they support or hinder development of autonomous learners. I think as a parent, one of the things I would advise you to do is to work with teachers to help your students be responsible but also autonomous. And one of these things is a huge shift right now, and I'm still kind of on the fence with both sides. There's some things I agree with, but the problem with grade inflation, teaching to the test, standards reference grading, different things like that, I do see some of the points that I think are important. On other sides, I think as a parent, I'm like, oh, this is not great unless it's done correctly. And so one of the things I think as an administrator, right, is that I love is that when parents reach out to the school and say, hey, we want you on our team, and they don't necessarily say it this way, but this is what it ends up looking like. Hey, we want you on our team to help raise our child and have them do good in school. We want them to be challenged. And I think as a parent, if you're asking the school to do that, hey, we want them to be challenged, you also have to let them fail when those challenges get too hard. Otherwise, you get false data and you get false information about what you can or can't do. And it's really hard for an educator to challenge your kids when they're sending stuff home or they're sending work home or doing whatever, and they're not actually doing it. Somebody else is doing it for them, or they're cheating, or different things like that. So I don't think this is a much longer discussion about the role of schools and how we are our role, I guess, as educators is to um, help parents in a way raise their kids. And it's funny because we're on the flip side of things, right? Where we want you to help raise our kids, but we don't want you to help too much. We don't want you to have them, do this, and this. We want to be in control of what they do, but we also want you to take care of them all day long. So that's kind of the political mess that we're kind of seeing now with schools. And there's a lot of different things happening in schools, but that's for another day and another podcast. So, one of the things that she talks about with her own kids is, setting the ground rules for conflict and resolving conflict. And she talks about fighting, as long as they understand the rules of um, conflict and quote unquote fighting, fair, arguing, or bickering. And I'm going to read this. So, because I have my boys' names down next to it. With 6 kids close in age, there's a lot of fun, a lot of love, and a lot of laughs. There's a lot of bickering and getting into each other's business. In fact, I've been known to call them the Bickersons. And this is a name change, right? Obviously. I learned early on that I have better ways to spend my time than inserting myself into a disagreement. Short of putting them in a soundproof room, instead, I've laid out the ground rules on how to fight fair early on, and as such, they seem to be able to resolve most things on their own. And the reason I bring this up is because I think it's important as a parent working with educators is that you can set some ground rules for your kids on how to communicate and solve problems with teachers. So one of those is to have your students do the communicating for themselves. If they have to retake a test or schedule something, or they forgot to bring their homework, or they, whatever it is that when your child does the communication to the teacher, it allows the teacher to communicate with the child and practice kind of being the adult with them, right? So I remember when I taught 9th grade, I would have some parents that would kind of, fight that battle for kids. And then I would have other kids that would fight their own battle. And as much as I hate to say it, when kids came in to fight their own battle, there was a level of respect that went up. We could have an open conversation that grades were connected to learning and they needed to show learning and different things like that. Whereas when a parent came in to try to solve the problem, and I'm not saying this is always the case, but sometimes it's almost like you're like, hey, let's separate this a little bit. And I realized that it was high school, and we're talking about scholarships and graduation and different things like that. And I totally am all for students, but I love it when students can advocate for themselves. And that's part of this part with the bickering, is that you can set some ground rules. And there's a couple of people that I work with is you can set ground rules and have the student, kind of use their voice, whatever. And there is a certain point, though, if the problem doesn't get solved, you need to jump in. And I'm thinking specifically of, whether it's bullying or racial things or different things like that. There's a certain point when, as a parent, the mama bear or the papa bear needs to come out because people aren't listening to the student. And I'm not advocating for students to just be on their own, right? But that's the part that she talks about. She has a whole chapter on sports and just how messy that's gotten. And then my favorite part is chapter 8, middle school. It is a prime time for failure. It is literally the dress rehearsal for high school. And it's this idea of, I love middle school. I've been a middle school educator for my whole career, 15 plus years. And um, it's this idea as a parent where you can let your kids go, but they're close enough to you that you can still have a good relationship with them when it talks about school. Here's the ugly, and this is a quote from page 136. Here's the ugly and wonderful truth about middle school. It's a setup. Middle school teachers ask students to succeed at tasks that their half-cooked adolescent brains are not yet able to master. And therefore, failure is not an if proposition. It's a matter of when. When we talk about this, right, we talk about 7 different classes, 7 different teachers, all the amount of homework. And I remember when I taught 7th grade, you'd have kids that had figured out the game of school and they generally did well. But my role as a teacher is to help those kids that hadn't figured it out, is to help them figure it out along with their parents. Um, the best part of this is she's quoting somebody else. The best part of moving to middle school was the idea that you were responsible for your own actions. In lower school, teachers were always reminding you had to hand in your homework, hang your coat up, pay attention, and stay organized. In a sense, 5th grade and before that were just years spent preparing ourselves for the daunting prospect that was middle school, and so to finally get there was the rewarding itself. And that's kind of there we go. That's kind of what middle school is for high school. It's this idea to help students be successful. And one of the things that I think really kind of is, the game of school is executive function. And that's the ability to, I'll just allows us to manage our time, resources, and attention in order to achieve a goal. So when you think about all of those things, manage our time, our resources, and attention to manage a goal. If you have a child right now that has ADD or any other 3-letter word, right? And I'm not generalizing all of those, but just the idea of executive function is the ability to manage time, resources, and attention to get something done. Most middle school brains are not developed well enough yet to make that happen. So that's why she talks about this is kind of breeding ground for failure, but also to overcome that. By the time you come out, you've learned a lot of those skills, hopefully, if you've done it right. I think it's also important to know as a parent, if you're listening to this, that you need to spend time teaching your kids executive function skills, not only for school, whether it's finances, money, emotions, relationships, all of those things kind of have an individual executive function skill built into them. And as an adult, you run into adults all the time that might have this great executive function in this realm of their life, but not so much in this other realm of their life. Anyway, so I wanted to kind of go through, talks about high school and beyond, talks about college a little bit. And Chapter 10, Parent-Teacher Partnerships, How Our Fear of Failure Undermines Education. So one of the things, make sure I highlighted it. Model enthusiasm for learning. So as a parent, this is what I loved, right? Your attitude towards education will be your child's attitude. Likewise, your enthusiasm for the process of learning for learning's sake is vital to installing the same in your child. Whether it's you read for fun, let your child see you reading for fun. It's a huge skill to have. And I'm not just talking about like the ability to read. I'm talking about after college, after whatever it is that they're going to do, is the ability to just sit down and pick up a book and be like, I want to know more about this, or I want to get better at this, or I want to read this story for enjoyment because I love writing. And so I think part of that she talks about, again, this is in chapter 10, is making sure that your first communication with the teacher is a positive. And we're going to go here and then I'll do my 5-3-1. One of the things that I do every year, I've done this, is as a parent, I write an email about my child. And I talk a little bit about, their health allergies. So we've got kids that are allergic to gluten. I talk about what they're involved in, whether it's, swim or dance or SPO or whatever. and I write maybe a paragraph. And this is always the week before school starts. And this is not like an ass kissing or anything like that, right? This is just a, hey, this is my child. This is what you should know about them. And it's positive. And my first interaction with every teacher every year is a positive one because I send this letter and or email. And so anyway, so I basically just talk about each one of my individual students, and then I send it to all of their teachers. And maybe it's the first week, maybe it's, before school starts, but I've got nothing but positive feedback. And teachers have actually reached out to me and say, hey, do you do this every year? I'm like, yep, I do it every year with every kid. It takes me 3 or 4 hours, but that sets up a foundation for an open communication with my teachers when my kids are struggling or when they need help. And I just think it's super important to talk about how much you love your kids, how amazing your kids are to your teachers, to your child's teachers. It will go a long way. I think that's something that is like one of my things that you should absolutely like do that. So that's kind of one of my takeaways. So here's 5 notable quotes. I want to make sure that I've covered kind of everything that I wanted to. And so here's quotes. When we don't allow our children to struggle and solve their own problems, they don't learn how to be competent. Competence leads to confidence, and confidence leads to resilience. I love that one. Next one is on the value of failure. Failure is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that a child is challenging herself or himself and developing her or his abilities. Parenting and independence. The best thing that we can do for our children is to allow them to do things for themselves, allow them to be strong, and allow them to have the freedom to fail. Overparenting. This is quote number 4. Overparenting has the potential to ruin a child's confidence and undermine their education. Number 5 is this is on the role of teachers and parents. Teachers and parents must act as guides and mentors, not protectors. That means stepping back and allowing children to experience frustration, disappointment, and failure. And I'm going to tell you right now, it is super difficult to do that. I currently have 4 high schoolers, senior, junior, sophomore, freshman. And watching them make decisions that I know will have long-term consequences is extremely difficult. We guide them, we tell them, we talk to them, but I don't make them do things. And that's one of the things that's been super hard for me as a parent. And I know it's for my wife as well. Okay. So kind of the 3 big takeaways for me are number 1, embrace failure as a learning tool. The book emphasizes the experiencing failure is a positive, and it's also essential for child's development. It argues that shielding children from mistakes and setbacks deprives them of the opportunity to develop critical problem-solving skills, resilience, and independence. So that's number 1. Number 2, big takeaway is focus on intrinsic motivation. When someone is intrinsically motivated, you will get more out of them. And if you're an adult and you work with people, the people that just have that inner drive to do well and to do the right thing and to do a good job and to give a 100% will save you so much time, so much energy on the back end. And it talks about in the book, right, is that overpraising, over rewarding actually removes that. So the third one, the big takeaway is promote autonomy and competence. This ability to choose, and whether the choice is wrong or not, right, is to take on the responsibilities and manage the consequences or the rewards for their actions, both good and bad. The book argues again that overparenting characterizes, by excessive control and intervention, hinders children from doing that. So I think one of my favorites, the key action that you can do right now is to allow children to experience and navigate failure. And I am talking about in all aspects of their life. I'm talking about financially. I'm talking about educationally. I'm talking about relationship wise, emotionally, mentally, is they've got to get to a point where they have to ask for help on their own. And instead of offering guidance and support while allowing them to the space, like, I guess you don't want to leave them alone and just let them, live on their own when they're 12 years old. That's not what I'm talking about. Is the idea of offering guidance and space and support And that space is allowing them to make those decisions and mistakes and figure it out on their own. And ultimately, what we will see, and what you will see, is that this helps children develop resilience and problem solving skills and self confidence. And the example I think that gets quoted a ton, right, is if a student forgets their homework, nowadays they would just call their parent or text and say, "Hey, I forgot my homework. Will you bring it over?" The example that Jessica uses in the book is, well, don't bring it to them, and they'll learn their lesson to not forget their homework. And maybe they have to learn the lesson 3 or 4 times. As an adult, think about how many times you've had to learn the lesson, right? Whether it's relationships, financial, different things like that, is eventually you're going to learn a lesson 4 or 5 times before you finally figure it out. Anyway, finishing up, it's been the book summary of The Gift of Failure by Jessica Lahey. Phenomenal. She's a great follow on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. She's got stuff that she posts regularly. She's super interactive. In fact, that's how I got this book. She sent a copy to me when I quoted her on Twitter. She reached out and sent me a copy. So super stoked to do this one. I'll probably actually do this one with Stuart. We'll have a whole episode about this one because he's kind of the vape guru as far as everybody I know is concerned. Anyway, thanks for your time.